Hi everyone, thanks for making the left turn for today, Sunday, August 6th, 2017. I'm George Farrar. Welcome back to the Jack's Left channel and welcome back to Who Runs Jacksonville. For years I've been looking at Who Runs Jacksonville, and this summer I'm looking at our corporate media, specifically at the television stations. Now these are television stations that do news broadcasts. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about these stations, and we're going to talk about where things are headed with this series, where I'll be looking at, and I'll be investigating, I'll be evaluating, I'll be critiquing these TV stations that are doing these news broadcasts every night. And so I have a lot to cover, a lot to go over with you. I'm going to be looking at the top stories, the owners, the big money, the advertisers. I'm going to be looking at all of that today. And then I'll also be talking with you about what's ahead. Now, to begin with, let's talk about money and advertising, because there's a lot of it, and we got to go back to the very beginning. WMBR, now known as WJAX-TV, was Jacksonville's first TV station. And for the opening years of television, starting in 1949, at one point they were a local monopoly. Later on, WFGA, which was later WTLV, came along. Now, if you look at this, it talks about this market, this economic market that existed back then. And it still does, it's just different industries. And news is a way really of the TV news station or the local TV station coming to the community and saying, hey, yes, we're making all this money on advertising, all this money on business, but we're going to tell you what's going on each day, and we're going to do all this, but we're going to make some money doing it. Okay, this capitalism. Always remember that what I'm talking with you about is not just news. People think of TV, it's capitalism. The local TV stations incentivize people to watch with good, and in some ways people might say entertaining news programming. That's what they're aiming to provide you so that they can make more money, make good advertising revenue. So that is the incentive. This is what capitalism, a form that capitalism takes in our daily lives. And we're now going to look at Jacksonville television because I decided that I would record the 6 o'clock local news broadcasts that broadcast on 5 TV stations in Jacksonville on July 26th, 2017. I had pre-planned to go ahead and do this so that I can kind of have a getting to know you session with these stations. And I've selected them, and we're now going to go ahead and see these stations. We're going to look at their top stories, the owners, the advertisers, some different quirks, and some strange things that I have seen. Let's begin with WJAX-TV. WJAX-TV started out as WMBR, which was the first television station in Jacksonville. And Channel 4 used to be the CBS network affiliate, but then in the early 2000s, WJAX-TV went independent, and the CBS network went to another station. The owner of WJAX-TV is Graham Holdings. Now, they have an interesting lineage going all the way back from the 1950s, formerly known as Post-Newsweek stations. This parent company, Graham Holdings of Graham Media Group, they still are the owners of Channel 4. And so that's what we have for Channel 4. Let's go ahead and take a look at, on July 26, 2017, the way the top story was conducted. On July 26th, a woman survived being carjacked by a bank robber who was in pursuit by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. He had robbed a bank, the Wells Fargo, on Blanding and Harlow. And so they had a really good interview with the victim, and they had had interviewed witnesses on the scene of where the shootout occurred. The robber was killed. The JSO officer that was shot survived. Advertising. Now, on WJAX-TV, advertising began at 12 minutes in. The closed captioning sponsored by Ameris Bank. We have Ashley Home Stores had their first spot. Then Florida Power and Light, Barnes & Cohen, a personal injury law firm, Beaver Toyota of St. Augustine. Ashley Home Stores did another spot. WJAX-TV Morning Show had an ad. Then Cadillac, Turner Pest Control, Lexus. Then they came back. Then the second ad block was 23 minutes in, whether sponsored by Farrah and Fair personal injury law firm, Wakehoff's air conditioning, General Motors, GMC, Brandon Pest Control, Wakehoff's air conditioning, the second spot, and a WJXT News for Jax ad. They then returned, but then later on went to advertising, but they had wrapped up the show by then. Okay, so now we go to WTLV 12 and ABC 25, WJXX. WTLV was initially called WFGA. They came in the 1950s, and later on, Channel 25 came along. WJXX came along in the 1990s. Now here's where things get really goofy, but first, let's go ahead, let's talk about the owner of these two stations. The owner of these two stations is called TEGNA, which was a spinoff essentially of Gannett. Were at one point, I know a couple years ago, they were headquartered in Virginia. And so it's a partial anagram of Gannett. So, and I remember Gannett coming in the 1980s. I became a news junkie back in the 1980s. Okay, so the top story on First Coast News at 6, WJXX, was with Jeannie Blaylock and Anthony Austin. The top story actually began with the meteorologist Tim Deegan discussing lightning, flooding concerns in southeast Georgia, and a thunderstorm west of Mayport, concerns about traffic, and then they went right to the traffic report that preceded them later talking about the incident, the bank robbery suspect and the carjacking. So advertising began almost 12 minutes in with a Good Morning Jacksonville ad, then Wheel of Fortune. Hanania Subaru of Orange Park had their first spot. Massey Services Pest Control, Mercedes-Benz of Jacksonville and Orange Park. Sun Tire, Hanania Subaru of Orange Park, spot 2. And then they came back, then advertising 20-minute occurred also then again 20 minutes in. NBC Nightly News promo, Ashley Home Stores, spot 1. Morgan and Morgan personal injury ad, Garber Auto Mall, another spot with Ashley Home Store, and sports sponsored by Fair and Fair personal injury ads. And they came back on. Then they went to a third ad block beginning at 25 minutes in. And that was Polo Tropical Restaurant, the first spot for them. Acura, Florida Lottery, Peninsula Pest Control, GMC, then another Polo Tropical Restaurant ad, Insure, Automatch USA, and Harrell Personal Injury Law Firm. Okay, and then they wrapped it up and went to the network. News. So far we've talked about WJXT and WJXX. Now we're going to talk about WTLV, but it gets real interesting here. It gets really strange. It gets really bizarre because when I went to look at the third recording I had, it's WTLV, and it's an absolute mirror of the broadcast. Jeannie Blaylock and Anthony Austin on an absolute mirror, including the same ads. The only thing different were the call letters. So that is something to think about. And we're going to see this also upcoming with the other two stations. They both broadcast the same news broadcast, but they'll do it a little bit differently. To me, I call that squatting, and we'll talk about that later on. I don't like carbon copy journalism. I don't like it at all. But first, now we go on to Action News. Again, these are two stations, CBS 47 and Fox 30. They put out the same news broadcast, but their advertising is going to be different on each station. That was a very interesting quirk. Now, they are owned by Cox Media Group. Another company that comes up in relation to them is Bayshore Television. And I would also bring back, just to bring back what I was talking about with those other two stations, WTLV and WJAX-X. They also have another indicator showing Multimedia Holdings Corporation, Multimedia Holdings Corp. So there are all these different groups. This Cox Media Group. They're based in Atlanta. Okay, so they utilize all these resources from these bigger networks, these operating companies. Okay, so the top story that John Bachman and Tanika Hughes covered on Action News Jax at 6 p.m. was meteorologist Mike Burrish. He zoomed in on a thunderstorm west of Mayport, and he announced a severe thunderstorm warning. Then they carried on with, that was a minute in, and then they carried on talking about the that robbery I had talked about earlier, and they did show the scene of the crime where the shooting occurred of the robber, and it showed a blurred body. Okay, they also had aerial coverage with their helicopter. Okay, so what we're looking at is a little bit more an in motion, a mobile story, a more of a right there, broadcasting what happened with not as much reaction, but where they were at that moment covering that crime. So Advertisers, now it gets very, very interesting. They do it a little bit differently on each station. Each station had advertising blocks 13 minutes in, 23 minutes in, and 27 minutes in. On WFOX, it was an Action News Jax promo, Action News Jax Morning promo, Dr. Joel David Associates Dentistry, Westside, and Brunswick Awesome Nissan, Parliament Roofing, Nissan year-end event, David and Associates Spot ViStar. Then also Jacksonville Property Buyers, Spot 1, Action News Jax this morning news promo, Bozard Ford Lincoln, Bald Bay Mower, Fair and Fair Personal Injury, Cadillac, and Harold, and Jack's Property Buyers Spot 2. Okay, but it was distinctly different over on WJAX. Okay, there were, I'm just give you some differences. North Florida Lincoln, Safe Touch Security Systems, ViStar, Osteen Volkswagen, Jacksonville Armada, Community First Credit Union. I'm just taking some differences. There were also some similarities. Okay, they were more the big money. Now, I want to bring out one thing that a viewer had brought up to me and pointed out, and he's right. There's a duopoly going on. Graham Holdings also not only owns WJXT TV4, they also own CW17. And what is there to stop WJXT from squatting and doing a second news station, which will be a carbon copy, just like the other stations are doing? Or maybe they do an original content news on this station, but they haven't done it yet. They haven't done news on CW17. Something to think about, okay? What angers me, okay, what gets the George blood boiling is the squatting, carbon copy journalism. You have two stations, but you broadcast the same thing, and maybe one station has different advertising, or maybe it's the same advertising on both. That's not the way you treat the people of Jacksonville. You give them original content. Another thing I want to point out is one of the stations waited until after their first advertising break to tell the people of the city of Jacksonville that the JEA had determined that there were cancer-causing chemicals concentrated based on chlorinization, the byproduct of chlorinization, in the water supply. Okay, I kind of think you could put that ahead of the first advertising break, but what do I know? I just drank our water. I think it's time for people to go ahead and say, hey, listen, here are the top stories, the real top stories, and the advertisers, they can wait. Or, hey, jettison advertising completely out. but we know that will never happen. There's a lot of money to be made in Jacksonville. You know, I'll tell you one thing. If personal injury lawyers suddenly were wiped off the face of the earth, our local TV news stations would be in a hurting for revenue. You know, if you look at it, you look at the differences in the advertising. You think about the differences in how the news is more in how it's presented, how people are engaged. That's what I'm looking at. There's going to be more evaluation, more investigation, more challenges ahead that I'm going to talk about. I want to thank you for watching the Jacksonville channel. Thank you for watching. Who runs Jacksonville? More to come. The best is yet to come. Take it easy. See you later.